I still remember the way my grandfather would smile at me from across his worn kitchen table. He taught me that true wealth was found in how we lived our lives, not the numbers in our bank accounts. When he passed away and left me his estate, I never expected the inheritance would expose the true colors of the people who were supposed to love me most. My parents abandoned me years ago when I refused to follow their path, but now they were back, with perfect smiles and designer clothes, ready to help manage what they saw as their golden ticket. Before I tell you how my parents' smiles disappeared forever in that courtroom, let me know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and subscribe to hear more stories about family betrayals and unexpected justice. Growing up in a modest neighborhood in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I learned early that my parents, Thomas and Jeanette, viewed money as the ultimate measure of success and control. Our house was always filled with conversations about status appearances and climbing the social ladder. While we lived comfortably in a middle-class lifestyle, my parents acted as though we were just one smart investment away from joining the elite. My childhood memories are stained with moments of financial manipulation. When I was 14 and wanted to join the school band, my father agreed to buy me a saxophone only if I maintained perfect grades. The moment I brought home a B+ in chemistry, he threatened to sell it. "Money is power, Damon," he would say. "Those who control the money make the rules." My mother was equally calculating. For my 16th birthday, she bought me a car, but insisted on holding the title. "We paid for it, so we decide when you can use it," she explained. When taking away my keys after I chose to volunteer at a local shelter instead of attending a networking event with her colleagues, college decisions became another battleground. I dreamed of studying marine biology, but they insisted on business school. "We will only pay tuition if you major in something practical," my father declared. When I applied for student loans to pursue my own path, they sabotaged my applications by refusing to provide their financial information. At 22, I finally broke free. With $300 saved from odd jobs, I boarded a bus to San Francisco, determined to build a life on my own terms. The tiny studio apartment I could barely afford became my sanctuary. My entry-level job at an environmental nonprofit paid just enough to keep ramen noodles in my cupboard. But for the first time, no one was using money to dictate my choices. My parents reduced contact to obligatory holiday calls, each conversation laced with reminders of how I had thrown away opportunities and how I would never amount to anything without their guidance. I accepted the distance as the price of freedom. But there was one family member who never tried to control me, my grandfather Harold, a self-made man who built a modest construction company through decades of honest work he lived, simply despite his success. During childhood summers spent at his lakeside cabin, he taught me to fish, build birdhouses, and value integrity above all else. "Money is just a tool, Damon," he would tell me, as we sat in his small fishing boat. "Like any tool, it can build wonderful things or cause terrible damage depending on the hands that wield it." After my move to California, those fishing trips became phone calls. Every Sunday evening, we would talk about my new life, his garden books we were reading, and the state of the world. He never once criticized my modest apartment or entry-level salary. Instead, he expressed pride in my independence and courage to forge my own path. When Harold turned 87, his health began to decline. I took unpaid leave from work and spent his final months by his side. We had deep conversations about life and legacy during those quiet days. Sometimes, between doses of medication, he would make cryptic comments that I only understood later. "I have been watching Damon," he said one evening, as the sun set outside his bedroom window, watching and taking notes. Some people show their true character when they think no one is looking. Another time, as I helped him organize his papers, he squeezed my hand and said, "I am setting things right, son. Some lessons can only be taught after we are gone." I was holding that same weathered hand when he took his final breath 3 months later. The loss left a hole in my heart that no inheritance could fill. A grandfather who had loved me for who I was, not for what he could mold me to become. 3 days after the funeral, I received a call from Jackson Williams, my grandfather's attorney. His voice was formal yet kind, as he informed me that I had been named the primary beneficiary of Harold's estate. "The reading of the will is scheduled for next Friday," he explained. "Your grandfather requested all family members be present for the formal proceedings." I thanked him numbly, still processing this unexpected development. Harold had never mentioned leaving me anything substantial. I assumed his modest home and savings would be divided among various family members. The idea of being the primary beneficiary left me reeling. Within hours of Harold's death hitting the local obituary column, my phone rang with a number I had not seen in years. My mother's voice came through with artificial warmth. "Damon, darling, we just heard about poor Harold. We are absolutely devastated. Your father and I are booking flights right now to help with all the arrangements." The timing of their renewed interest was suspicious after years of minimal contact, but grief clouded my judgment. Perhaps Harold's death was bringing the family together in unexpected ways. I agreed to meet them at the airport, hoping for genuine reconciliation. That hope diminished when they emerged from the terminal. My father sported an expensive new watch, and my mother wore a designer outfit inappropriate for a funeral visit. Their first questions were about Harold's house, not his final days or how I was coping. At the modest funeral service, Harold had requested my parents networked with relatives like they were at a business convention. My father cornered Harold's golf buddies to discuss property values in the neighborhood. My mother examined the antique grandfather clock in the hallway, commenting on its potential auction value. "Such a waste," I overheard my father say to a distant cousin. A successful man like Harold should have had a grand send-off, not this budget affair. But we will make sure his legacy is properly managed. Before the reception food was cleared away, my parents had moved their luggage into Harold's house, claiming the master bedroom to sort things out properly. I watched in stunned silence as they began cataloging valuables, discussing what should be sold and what kept. "That old boat needs to go immediately," my father declared, referring to the fishing boat where I had learned life's most important lessons. "We could get a nice, modern speedboat instead, something with actual value." My mother placed sticky notes on furniture pieces, already redesigning the house in her mind. "Once we update this place, we could easily double its market value," she said, completely ignoring that I lived 500 miles away with no intention of moving back. Their presumptions grew bolder each day. Over dinner, they discussed fixing Damon's financial mistakes and outlined how they would help me invest my portion of the inheritance, as if they had already determined how Harold's assets would be divided. "You have always been impulsive with money, son," my father said, pouring himself another glass of Harold's special occasion whiskey. "Thankfully, we are here now to make sure you do not squander this opportunity." My mother nodded in agreement. "We sacrificed everything to raise you properly. Now, we can finally see some return on our investment." The old familiar tactics emerged: guilt about their supposed sacrifices, suggestions that I owed them for basic parental duties, implications that I was too irresponsible to manage wealth. They alternated between extravagant promises of family vacations and thinly veiled threats about family obligations. By the morning of the will, reading my parents had already made plans for their share of Harold's estate. I overheard them discussing a vacation property in Florida and potential investment opportunities with Harold's business partners. The law office of Williams and Associates occupied the entire 10th floor of a downtown building. The reception area featured leather chairs, oak paneling, and a view of the city skyline that Harold would have appreciated for its craftsmanship rather than its prestige. As family members arrived, my parents positioned themselves as unofficial greeters, shaking hands and making small talk as if they were hosting the gathering. My mother had dressed in what appeared to be a new outfit, complete with pearl earrings that caught the light when she turned her head. My father wore a tailored suit with gold cufflinks, looking every bit the successful businessman ready to take charge. Damon is understandably overwhelmed. I overheard my father telling my Aunt Lisa, "Thankfully, we have experience managing substantial assets and can guide him through this transition." My mother added, "We have already identified several promising investment opportunities for the estate funds. Once everything is settled, we will make sure everyone benefits appropriately." Their confidence bordered on arrogance as they continued making promises to other relatives about what they would receive. Uncle Robert was assured that the vintage car collection would be properly evaluated with special consideration for his interest in the 1967 Mustang. Cousin Stephanie was told her student loans might be addressed once the liquid assets were properly organized. I sat quietly in a corner watching this performance with a growing sense of unreality. Throughout my life, my parents had mastered the art of speaking with such authority that others rarely questioned them. Now, surrounded by grieving family members, seeking reassurance, they were at their manipulative best. At precisely 10 o'clock, Jackson Williams entered with a leather portfolio under his arm. His silver hair and measured movements commanded instant respect, quieting the room without a word. Two younger attorneys followed with additional documents and a laptop computer. "Thank you all for coming today," Jackson began formally. "We are gathered to execute the last will and testament of Harold James Montgomery in accordance with his explicit instructions." My father nodded approvingly at the formal proceedings, while my mother straightened in her chair, both clearly enjoying what they perceived as their imminent financial elevation. Jackson methodically covered the standard provisions funeral arrangements, already executed charitable donations to Harold's favorite environmental organizations, and small personal items bequeathed to various friends. With each passing moment, my parents leaned forward slightly, their anticipation almost palpable. Before proceeding to the distribution of major assets, Jackson continued, "I am required to disclose the total value of the estate." He adjusted his glasses and read from an official document. "The estimated value of Harold Montgomery's estate, including real estate holdings, business interests, investment portfolios, and personal property, is $4,850,000. A collective gasp filled the room. Even I was shocked by the figure. My grandfather had lived modestly, driving the same truck for 20 years and wearing shirts until they frayed. The revelation of his wealth seemed incompatible with the man I knew until I remembered his patient investments and disciplined saving over 6 decades of work. My father's eyes widened, and he reached for my mother's hand, squeezing it triumphantly. They exchanged knowing glances, as if their suspicions had been confirmed. The jackpot was even larger than anticipated. My mother quickly opened her designer notebook and began jotting down figures, likely recalculating her plans based on the new information. Now, regarding the distribution of the estate, Jackson continued, his tone unchanged despite the dramatic revelation. "Harold Montgomery has left specific and detailed instructions." He opened a sealed envelope and removed several pages. "I will now read Harold's personal message in its entirety as required by his instructions." Jackson cleared his throat and began reading in Harold's unmistakable, straightforward manner. "To my beloved grandson, Damon, throughout your life, I have watched you grow into a man of integrity and independence. Despite challenging circumstances, you chose a difficult path of self-reliance rather than surrender your principles for financial comfort. That choice has confirmed what I always believed about your character. I have also observed with great disappointment the behavior of my son Thomas and his wife Jeanette. Their pattern of using money as a tool for control rather than support has been consistent throughout your upbringing and into your adult years. Their absence during your struggles and their sudden reappearance now that financial gain seems possible speaks volumes about their priorities." At this point, my father shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while my mother's pen stopped moving across her notebook. The room had gone completely silent. Jackson continued reading. "Therefore, I make the following distributions. To my son Thomas Montgomery and his wife Jeanette Montgomery, I leave the sum of $1,000 each. This token amount reflects the transactional nature of the relationship they chose to establish with their only son. The remainder of my estate, in its entirety, I bequeath to my grandson, Damon Montgomery, with the explicit condition that his parents shall have no access to or influence over these funds. Any attempt by Thomas or Jeanette Montgomery to contest this will or to exert control over these assets will result in their token inheritance being revoked and donated to environmental conservation. The silence in the room transformed into tension so thick it seemed to vibrate. My father's face flushed red while my mother's drained of all color. The notebook slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor with a sound that echoed through the stunned room. "This is outrageous." My father finally erupted, standing up so quickly his chair tipped backward. Harold was clearly not of sound mind. "We demand to see the official document." Jackson calmly slid the papers across the table. "The will has been properly executed with 2 witnesses and notarized according to state law. Additionally, Harold anticipated your reaction and prepared further documentation." He nodded to one of the younger attorneys who connected the laptop to a wall-mounted screen. A moment later, my grandfather's face appeared in a video recording. He sat in his study alert and composed, speaking directly to the camera. "If this recording is being played, it means Thomas and Jeanette have challenged my decision." Harold began, his voice strong and clear. "I want to state unequivocally that I am of sound mind and body. My doctor has confirmed this, and medical documentation has been provided to my attorney." He shifted slightly, his expression hardening. "I make this decision after years of observation. Thomas and Jeanette have consistently used financial leverage to manipulate and control Damon throughout his life. They withdrew support when he chose education over business threatened, and belittled him when he pursued independence, and abandoned him entirely when he refused to comply with their demands." Harold's eyes seemed to look directly at my parents as he continued. "They have shown no interest in his welfare for 8 years, making no effort to assist him during periods of hardship. Their renewed interest, coinciding precisely with my declining health and imminent passing, demonstrates their true motivations." My mother began to sob dramatically, while my father paced the conference room. "This is slander. We have always wanted what is best for Damon. Harold has poisoned him against us." But the recording continued relentlessly. "I have documented 17 specific instances of financial manipulation, including intercepted student loan applications, withdrawn tuition support as punishment, and deliberate sabotage of Damon's early career opportunities when he refused to follow their chosen path. These documents are included in the confidential addendum to my will." My grandfather's voice softened slightly. "This decision is made not out of malice but protection. Damon deserves the chance to determine his own future without the burden of manipulation that has characterized his relationship with his parents. My hope is that this inheritance will free him forever from their influence." As the video ended, my father turned to me, his strategy shifting instantly from anger to negotiation. "Damon, you know this is not right. We are your parents. We deserve." "Deserve what exactly?" I interrupted, surprising myself with my steady voice. "A reward for disappearing from my life for 8 years. Compensation for showing up only when there is money to be gained." My mother tried a different approach, tears streaming perfectly down her cheeks without disturbing her makeup. "We have always loved you, Damon. Your grandfather misunderstood our intentions. We can work this out as a family, share the inheritance the way Harold would have truly wanted." I looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in my adult life. I saw not a mother grieving a loss or concern for her son, but a performer playing a role designed to achieve a specific financial outcome. In that moment, something broke and reset inside me. "No," I said, simply the word hanging in the air between us. 8 years of independence had changed me more than they realized. I was no longer the compliant son who could be swayed by guilt or manipulation. My father's expression hardened. "After everything we have done for you, what exactly have you done for me in the past 8 years?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "When I was eating ramen noodles for every meal because my nonprofit job barely covered rent, where were you? When I needed surgery 2 years ago and had to set up a payment plan with the hospital, did you call even once?" My mother interjected. "We were giving you space to learn independence." "No," I cut her off. "You were punishing me for not following your plan." The only family member who stood by me was Grandpa Harold. He called every week. He sent care packages when money was tight. He flew out to help me after my surgery. I stood up, drawing strength from the memory of Harold's quiet wisdom. What you are doing right now, showing up only when there is money to be gained, is exactly why Harold made this decision. My father's face contorted with rage. "We will contest this will." Harold was clearly senile. Jackson Williams cleared his throat. "Mr. Montgomery, I would strongly advise against making unfounded accusations about your father's mental state. As you saw in the video, he underwent complete cognitive assessment just 2 weeks before signing this will. The medical documentation is extensive and conclusive. Furthermore," he continued, opening another folder, "Harold anticipated a potential challenge and prepared accordingly. He documented his reasoning extensively, including bank records, correspondence, and sworn statements from objective third parties regarding patterns of behavior. Contesting this will would be both expensive and frankly embarrassing for you." Aunt Lisa, who had been sitting quietly, suddenly stood up. "I think we all heard what Harold wanted. And frankly, Thomas, everything he said matches what I have observed for years about how you treated Damon." Other family members nodded in agreement, years of unspoken observations finally finding confirmation. My parents gathered their belongings hastily, my father announcing loudly that we would be hearing from their attorney. As they stormed toward the exit, my mother turned back, attempting one final manipulation. "If you let this stand, Damon, you will no longer be our son." I met her gaze steadily. "I stopped being your son the day I realized your love was conditional on my obedience." Grandpa Harold was more of a parent to me than either of you ever were. After the meeting, I returned to Harold's house to find my parents frantically packing valuable items into their suitcases, artwork, silver, and even Harold's war medals. When I confronted them, my father claimed they were family heirlooms that Harold would have wanted them to have. When they refused to return the items, I was forced to call the police to escort them from the property. As officers supervised their departure, my mother hissed that I would regret this betrayal for the rest of your life. My father promised financial ruin through extended legal battles. True to their word, they hired expensive attorneys to contest the will on grounds of undue influence. The 6-month legal battle that followed only revealed more evidence supporting Harold's decision. Their attorneys uncovered nothing to support claims of mental incapacity or manipulation. When the judge finally dismissed their case with prejudice, stating that the evidence overwhelmingly supports the deceased's concerns about financial manipulation, my parents made one final attempt to negotiate, offering to drop all future claims in exchange for a mere 20% of the estate. My answer remained firm: no. The months following the legal battle were both liberating and deeply painful. Though I had maintained emotional distance from my parents for years, the finality of our separation left an undeniable void. Some nights, I would sit on Harold's porch, looking at old family photos, mourning not what was, but what could have been. Yet with each passing week, I felt the weight of their expectations and manipulation lifting. For the first time, I could make decisions without calculating the emotional cost of their disapproval. The inheritance itself remained largely untouched in the accounts Harold had established, managed by financial advisors he had carefully selected for both their expertise and integrity. When I was finally ready to address the estate thoughtfully, My first action was establishing the Harold Montgomery Foundation for Environmental Education, dedicating $1 million to providing scholarships and research opportunities in the field I had always wanted to study. The foundation focused particularly on supporting students whose families could not or would not assist with educational expenses. I bought a small house near a nature preserve, nothing extravagant, but with a workshop where I could continue Harold's tradition of building birdhouses and a back porch, perfect for morning coffee and reflection. The remainder of the inheritance was carefully invested with emphasis on sustainable companies and ethical business practices. Physical distance from my parents gradually transformed into emotional healing. I began working with a therapist who specialized in family financial trauma, unpacking the complex relationship between love, money, and control that had shaped my early years. Through this work, I came to understand that my parents' behavior reflected their own insecurities and limited view of success rather than any failing on my part. Money magnifies who we already are, my therapist observed during one particularly insightful session. Your grandfather's wealth magnified his generosity and wisdom. Your parents' response to the possibility of wealth magnified their controlling nature, and now your inheritance is magnifying your thoughtfulness and desire to create positive impact. Unexpected connections emerged from the family fracture. Aunt Lisa, who had stood up for me at the will reading, became a regular part of my life. Uncle Robert, who had maintained polite distance during my years of estrangement from my parents, invited me to his workshop to restore Harold's beloved fishing boat. Cousins I barely knew reached out with old stories about my grandfather, expanding my understanding of his life and legacy. Together, we formed a chosen family based on genuine care rather than financial obligation or genetic coincidence. Our holiday gatherings were modest compared to the elaborate events my parents once insisted upon, but they were filled with authentic laughter and acceptance. 2 years after Harold's passing, I received a small package from an unfamiliar address. Inside was his worn fishing hat and a sealed envelope dated 1 month before his death. The letter inside contained just a few lines in his familiar handwriting. Damon, wear this old hat when you need to remember what matters. True wealth is never measured by dollars, but by the freedom to live according to your values. Your parents may never understand that the real inheritance I leave you is not in my bank accounts, but in the example of a life well lived. I am prouder of you than you will ever know. Love, Grandpa Harold. I framed the letter and hung it in my workshop where I could see it every day. The fishing hat went on a special hook by the door, ready whenever I needed its particular wisdom. As for my parents, I heard through family that they had moved to Arizona, still telling anyone who would listen about how they had been robbed of their rightful inheritance. They had apparently found a new social circle where their version of events garnered sympathy, and they had returned to their familiar pattern of leveraging appearances for advantage. I felt no anger toward them anymore, only a calm acceptance that some relationships cannot be healed when the fundamental understanding of love is so different. My grandfather had given me not just financial freedom, but the greater gift of emotional liberation from toxic patterns that had bound our family for generations. The true inheritance was never about the $4.85 million. It was about finally inheriting my freedom. Have you ever had to stand your ground against family pressure, especially when money was involved? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest battles we fight are with the people who are supposed to love us most. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more real-life experiences about finding strength in difficult situations. Drop a like if you believe, like my grandfather did, that the most valuable inheritance is not measured in dollars, but in lessons and freedom. Thank you for listening, and remember, family is about love and support, not control and manipulation. Share this story with someone who might need to hear that message today.